Hi, I'm Erin. I'm the co-convener of Out for Independence, and today we are honored to be joined by Martin Boyce to talk about his experience as one of the people who was present at the Stonewall Riots and his experience as an LGBTQ activist since then, and to talk about where we're going today with our movement. I'm just absolutely honored to be able to do this interview and bring this video to you. And hopefully we will have this released for International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, and Transphobia. Martin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Martin Boyce. I'm from New York City, and I'm a Stonewall participant and a person into oral history.
Brilliant, thank you. So I just want to start before Stonewall. You grew up in New York City. Can you tell me what it was like growing up there in the 60s?
Well, New York City was probably the best city in the United States for a gay person to live in. But that doesn't mean it was really a good place in the sense of what that word really means. The homophobia was rampant, just absolutely rampant. And gay bashing was a national sport. It was a city sport. The police understood because boys will be boys and are very offended seeing a feminine boy. And we were all supposed to be wonderful, great Americans. And I grew up, and I remember as a teenager, I was very impatient and I wanted to get to the other side of Central Park at night. I was waiting for the bus and doing the right thing. Except I said, it's going to take too long. I crossed the park myself. On the way to the other side of the park, and I knew I was near the gay section, I heard this blood-curdling scream. And I was only 16, and it was horrific. There was nothing I could do about it. I knew from the temper of the scream. To run to it was foolish and dangerous. I just continued on my way, and fortunately, I was so lucky, I thought, was a group of policemen outside of the exit of the park. And I thought I'd tell them because, this was something important. And I said to the policeman, I said, listen, I heard this terrible scream. Something happened in there. You have to go in and find and help this person. And then he looked at me and he said, do you have a dog with you? And I said, oh, no. And he said, do you live in this neighborhood? I said, no. He said, well, what were you doing in the park? And he started scratching his chin. And all of a sudden, I realized I was becoming a victim. I was a victim because I heard, what was going on in the park. And he called his friends over, the other policemen, and said, come over here and listen to this queer story. And it was so intimidating. They opened up a little. I did slip out. After all, I had done nothing wrong, but they had victimized me and they could have done what they pleased. It was up to their whim. But right then and there, I knew what gay people had always told me, don't ever go to them, ever for help, because they're not on your side. And that's how we lived. We lived in a world in which the police wanted us in jail, and psychiatrists wanted us in mental institutions, and the clergy wanted us in hell. And I'm saying this with regret because, it was a great gay culture developing underneath all this. And I think, I could see now, I wouldn't know then. That's what burst out. This growing confidence, this growing debate, not about our liberty, but about actual aspects of life, like Tennessee Williams and Edward Albee and the great gay playwrights and writers of Capote. Things had changed. We didn't know how much they changed because most of us would do volunteer work for the NAACP, for women's group, but never for ourselves because we never thought about it in that way. We weren't biologically a minority or anything like that, and we were a sexual minority, but minor to the straight world, as women were, and maybe a majority, and they had a movement. So what happened was all of this was happening internally. All of us were changing our attitude in life. Stonewall wasn't because New York City It wasn't because, well, it was because of New York City, but not just because New York City was so advanced and we were so liberated. No, it happened in many, many places, but New York City was the place where the spotlight was always on. And that meant, and the quality or the scope, I should say, scope of the raid in the central section of the village was different than any other raid I'd ever been in. I've been in a few of them. They're usually on the outskirts towards the waterfront. This was right there for the world to see, and they saw it.
Thank you for that. So you were talking a bit about the developing queer scene in New York City underneath all of this oppression. Can you tell me a bit about what it was like on Christopher Street and in the bars that would accept LGBTQ people there, and what the policing of that was like and being there during a raid?
If we were in a drone flying over Manhattan in June 27th, 1969, we would come to this very bright street, which was Christopher Street, because there's safety in numbers, truthfully. And, wherever we went before as a group of 2 or 3, some of us had to keep our eyes open for the coming danger, which was constant, was always possible, very much probable. And this is how we lived. But we would get from place to place, and we would at least know what was happening. Someone was walking in a strange way. A group was too rowdy, too many boys, whatever. We would sort of be alerted to this thing. And you didn't have to worry about that at Christopher Street, because Christopher Street was so many of us. And the Vice Squad, which were cops that dressed as gay people, that arrested you, they would seduce you, type of person that would entrap you. Entrapment was a big thing. And, but gays are very observant people. And the thing was, no matter how good looking they were, or no matter how endowed they were, no matter how great they looked, we were even told when we came out, if the trick is too good for you, and too out of your range, you're too lucky, check their shoes. The one thing that the straight Vice Squad police never did in the gym or their locker room was change their shoes. They always had these clodhopper shoes, so we knew who they were. They were quite confounded on Christopher Street because they could not operate. So Christopher Street was the one street in which there was a bit of freedom, and we could go walking back and forth, and our conversations would never be interrupted by the kind of violence and danger or threat, mostly threat, that existed everywhere else.
Thank you. So gay life on Christopher Street, a lot of that was centered around the Stonewall Inn. Can you tell me about Stonewall?
Again, Stonewall was exceptional already because it was a dancing bar. It was easily accessible. It was right in the center of the village. It was a fascinating groups of people. It was like a gay Noah's Ark. If there was a flood and they could have floated, there were 2 or 3 of every type of gay person in there. It was not one crowd. There wasn't one gay. There was a homosexualities. There wasn't a homosexuality. And Stonewall was the place where we had to learn to tolerate each other, because to enjoy the amenities of this bar and to dance and to listen to the great jukebox, you had to put up with a lot of other gay people you may not like. I mean, these gays in suits could not stand the flame queens that look like Boy George, that type of queen. The Scaredrag was called, and vice versa. But we learned tolerance. It was quite wonderful. And they had this magnificent jukebox, and the African-American queens, drag queens, would stand in front of it in Vogue. They controlled the jukebox in the way that I heard in prisons. Some people controlled the telephone. The jukebox was the center of Stonewall's soul. I remember very well because I was allowed, some people were not allowed to get to the jukebox. I was allowed to get to the jukebox. I always played funky music. And then one day I was nostalgic, and a friend of mine was going away, and I played Peter, Paul, and Mary's Leaving on a Jet Plane. I was not allowed to that jukebox again. My father had to triple my allowance. He had the answer. He said, buy each queen a drink or two, and they'll let you back. But be careful. I did. They did let me back. I remember the night they let me back, they parted in front of the keys of the jukebox, gave me a duck face, and looked at me and said, go ahead, girl. I played Aretha Franklin, Respect. I was back. So also that jukebox used to answer arguments. There would be arguments between queens, and they would play a song to answer their final answer, their final snap, used to call it. And so a lot was going on. It was hip, and a lot of hipness and degrees of hipness, but it was a bar for everybody. It was, I used to always say, it's like the great watering hole in the savannah. You know, it attracted everybody. And no one group dominated because they didn't want that. They could make money by making it ecumenical, in which all the groups could enjoy. But it took some patience and some fortitude to deal with some people you didn't care for. But that was our bar. That was Stonewall, a very, very great bar.
Thank you. That sounds amazing, and like something that we could really learn from in this current moment about being accepting of all parts of our community. If you could now take me to June 1969 and what happened the night of the riot.
Yes. Well, I was in scare drag, like Boy George is androgynous, and so is my friend, my crowd, the Congo Queens, or mostly like this. I'm the Congo Queens. Thinking of Congo woman in particular, the Stonewall Queens. And someone who dressed like me, was like me, came up to me and Bertie. We were both going, my friend Bertie and I, and said, "You're not getting in," because I couldn't get in. And we did, "Oh, you're not going to be new right away." All right, they're not letting our type in that night. Okay, we had other nights, but there was a ruckus behind me. And Stonewall was 6 or 7 stoops down. And what used to happen, the first thing when you came out, you always taught about what a raid was all about. They told you right away, the shoes of the police and what to do in a raid. And I thought, well, you know, I was half listening all the time because I was thinking, it's not really likely to happen. But it turned out I was in a number of raids. And what would happen is the police would come in. But also what would happen, we victimize ourselves enough if you weren't in the raid, there was a kind of schadenfreude, this kind of joy that you weren't, and let's watch the show. And what would happen was the queens would come out to cheers. They always happen. The people that were trying to hide would come out to cheers, the lawyers, and those who didn't have ID were on their way to the paddy wagon, and everyone was downtrodden. And that's the way was. And I went down to look, because that's what we used to do. And I went to a paddy wagon in a car, and I came out into the space, and now the crowd had made a semicircle around the bar. Those people that were in the bar and some that were not in the bar were now onlookers. And this cop, I could see, grabbed this queen and dragged her to the paddy wagon, and really horribly, and threw her in. And I thought, wow, because that you didn't see very often. It was done. We knew it was done, but no, we have crowds watching. Well, she did something that if I would have known that this night was going to be like no other. She kicked him in the shoulder and sent him flying away from the step of the paddy wagon. He just shook his head a little and rammed himself back into that paddy wagon. And you heard bone against and flesh against metal, and the decreasing sound of moans as that person must have lost consciousness. And he came out, his back towards us, closed the car up, turned around, and said to us, "All right, you faggots, you saw what you saw, now get out." And that's the way it used to be. And that should have been the end of everything. Except he turned around to do his thing in front of Stonewall, whatever that was next step was going to be. It was a regular raid. And we kept taking a step towards him, getting very close to him. I didn't know what anybody else looked like. We didn't know what he looked like because we just kept moving towards him. And then I noticed the hair on the back was very close to him. And the hair on his back of his neck was raised. And he quickly turned around and lifted the stick. I was going to say it again until he saw what we looked like. And he gulped, he blinked, and he ran back into the bar. And they did it all along the semicircle because there's enough provocation and contempt and divisive contempt they had for us. You could see it in their faces. And they all ran back into this bar. They closed the bar doors, but there were the peepholes. You could see their faces laughing contemptuously, thinking this is going to be a very, very easy thing. They're going to be rescued very quickly, and this is funny. It was not funny. What happened was everybody gathered around the bar, and I think everybody remembered that one moment, all the people we lost to lobotomies, to homelessness, to prisons, to being crippled by beatings and half recovered from beatings. We never talked about them, but we all had a list in our head of people we once liked and were no longer with us. And we all thought of that, I think, all at once. And it's going to be an election year, and this is going to be the beginning of it. And here we felt really raped because this is the middle of the city. And here they're all watching. It's okay. No, it wasn't okay. We went crazy. We started throwing pennies because they're made of copper, and they were still the coppers. And we started throwing everything that was in our pockets. And we started picking up everything we could, glass bottles, anything that was in a trash can. There was a major intelligence to this riot. I'd been in riots before, but never did they have such a goal and such a focus and such a reason. And some queen went out and came back with huge bags of oranges that were squeezed out from an orange store nearby that made juice. And we could throw those because in a riot, this rage comes and it has to be satisfied. And the riot's not over until that's satisfied or there's blood. It's the way it is. It's just the way it is. And this was getting very, very serious. And in a riot, it's sort of like being in a kaleidoscope. You're moving. You're not seeing one thing. And you're smelling something burning. And you're hearing glass break. And you're smelling the body next to you. You hear the testosterone lies thick on you. And it's swirled around. And then all of a sudden you stop. And there's moments of lucidity. Well, one of these moments of lucidity, I looked at on the window of Stonewall was this queen who was not very like Miss New Orleans, a very poor and sickly looking queen, but I could not believe it. I had never seen anything like that since seeing a poster of John Brown or a painting of John Brown, the abolitionist. This queen was on fire. This queen really was venting her unhappiness and her inability to deal with this kind of oppression she was under. She was angrier than all of us put together. She jumped down. She was lifted a parking meter almost single-handedly. Then they helped her. They started ramming the door. They were almost breaking in. Someone set the door on fire. They no longer were laughing at the police. Now it's this heightened worry in their eyes because no one was coming to their rescue, it seemed. And then the loudest thing of all in a riot, silence, complete silence. And this thumping, though, thumping, this called a stormtrooper thumping. And then the crowd opened, and there they were, the tactical police force. And there they were with their helmets and their shields and their gas masks and their all this tremendous equipment because they were designed to fight a real group of people in the 60s that were really threatening the government, militarily even. They could not believe, that they were facing these queens who were very instinctual and got even more feminine to mock them and broke their wrists to mock them. They sort of sensed it. We both looked at each other the way they say that Aborigines and Europeans looked at each other for the first time before they fought. They saw to size each other up. Well, there was very little to size up. And we knew we could humiliate them. Simply, we grabbed arms, we did a kick line, we did this rocket kick, and sang "We Are the Village Girls." We wear our hair in curls. We wear our dungaree above our Nelly knees. And when it comes to boy, and they attacked. That's what it was. Because we knew we had to get them to attack us. We knew instinctually, without having any leader, to keep this going as long as possible. And that was the only way to measure success in any way. But we knew the village. And first of all these attacks that straight people had, or straight guys had, had tormented us with, made us very good urban guerrillas. We could split up and find ourselves again. On the way to the movies, if we were attacked, we could split up, find ourselves again, go to the movies. Our night was never fully interrupted. But this made us very good urban guerrillas, and we knew the village the way the Lakota Indians knew the plains, or the Mohawk Indians knew the forests. We knew the village. And sometimes we would wind up behind them, and they were looking for us, and we would taunt them, and it was unbelievable. Their reaction was, it was too much. It was too much to fight these queens. It was an insult to their masculinity, they thought. And at the same time, they were outwitted. So, and two great things of the riot was all the straight people that were caught in the riot and men who had with their girlfriends, the world collapsed because they could no longer defend their girlfriends. They were very nervous. They were all taken away from the riot gently because it's not about them and not about straight. It was about the cops because our parents are straight, And queens that hardly spoke to each other, like Nazimova and Miss Marsha, or hardly acknowledged each other, were fighting side by side. It was amazing. Even the A-gays risked their jobs because there's a real risk if they're arrested. The lawyers, they were whatever, teachers. Some of them joined. All of them were with us. It was worth it no matter what was going to happen. And we thought whatever was going to happen, they were going to crack down on us one way or the other. For this one night of freedom, we had to have it. Everybody had to have it. It was reckless, yes. It really was reckless. But it was so necessary. The torments of the years building up blew over. And, it was happening everywhere. Gay people had changed. We didn't know we changed, but we changed. It was no longer going to be like this anymore. And from that night, I remember there's an expression I once read or as a translation of the Quran that said, whoever builds the spider's house builds the weakest house of all, for it's built in the house of another. And we had built the spider's house, and that was over. All over the world, it was the beginning of it being over. No longer the spider's house. We have our own work to do.
Thank you. That is an incredible story. And then after the Stonewall Riots, the next year in 1970, you and your friends organized the world's first Pride Parade. Can you tell me what that was like?
Yes, it's my favorite moment in all the gay history I witnessed. Because we heard, and my friend Bertie Rivera, we had heard there was going to be a march. And it was going up the avenue. I thought it was going to be Fifth Avenue. I thought it was going to be floats. I thought all this stuff. And it was a very daring thing to do because, that same year, 1970, the hard hats had attacked the hippies. They were fighting back now. The right was fighting back, and right-wing people and the prejudiced people were fighting back. And so it was very, very dangerous to do anything that brought attention to ourselves, especially after the riot a year before. When I was watching National Geographic, and I noticed that all the wildebeest, those on the ends, were the ones the crocodiles got. So I said, I'm going to march in the middle of the march. And I told Bertie, we'll march in the middle of the march, and we're going to be safe. And he said, okay, that's a very good idea. Although Bertie wouldn't mind being then. But anyway, we did march, but the problem was the guy who was directing us was saying, all right, we're going to call this the first run because there wasn't enough of us. And we had to go single file. I couldn't believe it, but I did it. I was in it, I did it. And we started marching up, not Fifth Avenue, it was a small space of ugly Sixth Avenue, small space, and nothing but police barricades to separate us, and nothing but this incredible curiosity of tourists, and everyone was on the street. What was this all about? But as we kept marching, there was people, lots of gays came to see it. Word got around, it wasn't in the paper, but word got around that old-fashioned way, and there were a lot of gay people there, and they were watching. They had no intention of going to join this very strange situation. But no, they fought. I could see them fighting with themselves. I could see them jumping the police barriers. I could see them joining. I could see people above in the buildings cleaning windows and waving their flags in harmony with us. And not a majority, but a lot of people encouraging us. Tourists like really appreciating the photos they were getting, and then all of a sudden, I was in the middle. Much grew, and I was in the middle with Bertie. And I started laughing, and Bertie said, "You feel safe now?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And we were marching, and we were almost to the park, almost to Central Park, and we stopped. The policeman was nearby. I could see him, and I yelled out to him, "Why did you stop us now? We were so close. Why?" And he said, "I didn't stop you." He said, "There's too many of you to get through the gates." I said, "Really?" And sure enough, it took a while to fill the park, and we filled the park, and all the hills were covered with gay people. I mean, I heard statistically, even the police cadets talking on the train saying they're 10% of the population of New York, the males are gay. It was like, I thought it was a pretty large number too, and they were amazed. And yeah, I think they were right. There's just tons of gay people, multitudes all over the place. And on top of this one hill was this Latina transsexual or transgender person doing this modern dance of freedom. I never understood modern, not a dance, I didn't understand. Modern art I did. But I understood modern dance as modern art when I saw her. She used her arms as wings of freedom, and she pointed herself like a statue towards the sky. It was very, very beautiful. I became a fan of Martha Graham even afterwards. I was just so thrilled to see these body movements and understood what they meant. And so it became, what was a question mark down in Washington Square Park, 60 blocks away, was now an exclamation point. And I think it's the proudest moment I ever had of being gay. I think that solidified us and made us, started to make us a people. Yeah, I think so.
Amazing. Thank you. That just sounds like such an inspiring moment to have been present at. Why do you think this moment became the crystallizing moment for the kind of queer rights movement? Like even in the UK, our major LGBTQ organization is called Stonewall, after what happened in New York. Why do you think that this was the moment that this crystallized?
Because it was New York. I mean, New York had its finger on the pulse of global culture. It's the center of the art world, of English language publishing, TV. I mean, New York was the center of everything. I think things were happening even earlier sometimes. And I understand the resentment of people in San Francisco, because things happened in San Francisco, in Philadelphia, in LA. England had already passed a law, and there was a report that was favorable. Things happened here in Canada. And so, but it was New York, and that's where the world spotlight was. And it was a bar in the center of the city. And too many people witnessed it. And it brought out, because you see, there was more political activity on the streets, on the street that Stonewall was on Christmas Street, in the next week or 2 weeks that followed the riot even, than there was in Moscow in 1917. I'm quite sure. It was so politicized all of a sudden, and they couldn't have thought this overnight. It wasn't because a week ago we had rioted. No, people had thought this out already, but had no chance to express it. And what we did express, for the first time in 2,500 years, is the sacred band of Thebes since they defeated Sparta, the great Sparta, was valor. We were able to display valor as a group. And that I think my father appreciated, and the more proletarian masculine men of the city, which, we started winning hearts and minds of those people that seemed the hardest. And that was the valor we displayed. I think men, heterosexual men, testosteronic men understood that. And that was the beginning of cracking that wall, which the police shared those kind of feelings, even though their job caused contempt. Nonetheless, their wall was cracking, and that was really important, very important. And I will tell you how important. I was going down the street about 4 days later, after Stonewall, in my neighborhood, a residential neighborhood, and I saw this very, very strong and powerful African-American man. He was working for the sanitation department, and he was throwing huge bags of trash into the back of a truck. And I thought, I was uneasy seeing him, and I thought I should have crossed the street, and I didn't. And he stopped what he was doing, and he glared at me. And I was very sorry I didn't go across the street, because now I was trapped between the truck and the wall. But he raised his fists in the salute of the day. Everybody on the block looked, and everyone that was delivering looked. And it was very peculiar to them that why this strong man was doing this in front of a very feminine white person, even, So what he was recognizing valor, like my father said to me when I got home, was, you couldn't mention the word homosexual or gay in the paper or radio anywhere, but you'd hear the word faggot 50 times an hour. Faggot this, you're a faggot that. And my father says, about time you guys did something. So my father was, a very, very tough man, very tolerant man, but a very, very tough man, like that man that raised his fist. So I always credit that to a lot of the liberation. It changed the idea of who we were, what we were, and what we were about.
When you were talking about the scene at Stonewall earlier, you were talking about how central gender nonconforming people and drag queens and trans women were to the culture on Christopher Street and at Stonewall. And you mentioned earlier that you mentioned Marsha P. Johnson earlier. I was wondering if you could tell me a bit more about her, because she's sort of one of the icons of queer liberation, and what work you've been doing on her legacy.
Yes, she is deserving of the attention she's been getting. I think she's gotten more attention than Kamini and some other people that would seem to be the real heroes of the gay world. But she was heroic to begin. First of all, she was a very nice queen amongst all these catfighting people, because the Stonewall crowd were could be very catty. She never really was. She always had time for everybody, and time to say hello, and time to say how you're doing. And it was always very, very nice. And I remember never seeing her coming up the street, knowing she's going to stop to talk, never being bothered about it, always being part of the pleasantries of the day, the evening, or whatever happened. And Marsha was very, very kind and very brave and went through a lot. I mean, one time I had heard that they threw her wig, these straight boys threw her wig in the Hudson River. Very horrible river to have to deal with. And she said, I needed that. That's part of me. And they threw her in after it. And she managed in heels to get back up those docks, rotting docks, and get back up to the embankment again. So I'd asked her when I saw her, because I said, well, I heard they threw the river. She goes, oh, that. And so she said, oh, that. So her life was like, she had these amazing things happen to her. And it was all part of life. I think that was her genius. And I remember one incident where I went down to the village, and I went to the docks, and there was nobody there. And I said, I had just missed a police raid. It must have been. There's nobody around. And I hear from under a car saying, whoever you are, girl, save yourself, save yourself. And I was like, what is going on? And I heard again, please listen to me. And I looked down, under the car was Marsha in a dress, lying flat down, saying, girl, save yourself. Don't dawdle, save yourself. I looked up and I saw what she was talking about. They were these bunch of boys with bats in a car. And if they would have jumped out at me then, they were just passed, they wouldn't have got a good shot. And they were in a car, so I sped around the block to come again so they'd be in a better position when they jumped out. I could tell that. We were attacked so much, you could tell what was happening, how people think you're often right. And luckily, this truck driver either saw something and stopped his truck from across the street towards the river and opened the door, and which meant I was invited. And I ran over and got in the truck with him, and I was saved. But I could have been answering her. They could have sped a little more quickly. She could have got caught herself. She could have got hurt. So that was Marsha. She was valiant like that. And I always loved her for that. And she never thought anything of it. I thanked her again and again when I saw her again. She goes, "Oh, girl." Yeah. Nice, very nice. And so anyway, they're going to make a beach. They want to make a beach at the end of the street near the docks, near Crystal Street. And these trans queens called me and asked, they'd seen my videos and they said I looked sensible. And would I help them rename this area for Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera? And I said I would help them. It's just starting. We're just starting. As much as possible, and I really will go for it because I think they're deserving, instead of having the silly beach, of an area that is designated to these Black and Latin gay people who were so oppressed even after the liberation and now are under tremendous attacks. So I want to help them have that space. And I want to be able to look at that space, and I want to be able to remember Marsha myself. So I'm going to work very hard with that. So that's my new plan. Yes.
Brilliant. Thank you. So you've just mentioned how parts of our community are coming under sort of increased attacks lately. It is something that's quite difficult, is there's been so much progress over the last decades in terms of decriminalization, in terms of in the UK ending the ban on talking about anything to do with queer people in schools, in Canada's conversion therapy ban. There's been so much progress made. And yeah, in the last couple of years, we've seen increasing attacks on the rights of trans people, especially in the United States right now, with the banning of healthcare for trans youth in several states. I was just wondering if you have anything to comment on sort of our present sort of very difficult moment where we seem to be slightly losing some ground.
Things like this are not necessarily bound to happen, but are very probable with the growing evolution of politics and political stance of people. I personally think they're trying to throw the trans people under the bus and give us some sort of recognition. I mean, my mission to Canada being paid by the American embassy was not Biden's embassy, was Trump's. So I think they're trying to buy us off with normalcy for you. In other words, we have to stick together. And that's what we're doing. I can even hear from your voice in your question, which is the kind of question that develops out of that kind of thinking. Understand? Yes, we're going to run into problems. But we have a stand now. We are a people. We have a stand. We have a history. We have geography. We have all these things to fight from. In 1969, we had none of these things. So yes, it's going to come. There's going to be battles. We're going to have to be vigilant. We're going to have to adjust to each situation. And we have to understand the nature of hate and how it's impossible to sit down and analyze that hate. But on the other hand, it's very good to analyze how people who hate work. And we've seen it before. We've seen it with Anita Bryant in the United States. And there was a straight boycott of orange juice at the time. I was very impressed. And I think gay people come up with things that impress themselves and others. I'm not fearful of our battle. I'm not fearful of our side in the fight. The point is, we're going to show that values, like my father said, like that black man salute. We're going to show that we can fight, and a fight's a fight.
Thank you. Thank you. What do you see as the sort of signs of hope and signs of progress that we have now, even sort of in this moment?
I know because every time as we do, and gay people have this long thing, this Plato of the younger teaching the older, or the older teaching the younger, and living this way is how we learned at Stonewall. The older gays taught younger gays many important things, whether we appreciate it or not. And that's always happening. And whatever we had to pass the torch, in my generation, to another generation, that generation, we always pass it to willing hands. And it makes a big difference. It was never like, oh, you have to do this. No, that hand was always out there, ready to clutch the flame, clutch the holder of that flame. Because, yeah, I just think gay people are like this now. They just have taken that flame and are running high with it. The other thing I do want to tell you before we forget is the role of women is very important in this movement. And women and male gays are the wings of the same bird if we're soaring towards freedom. Because they were so important, but they didn't cruise, they didn't go to tea rooms, they didn't get arrested. So they didn't have this kind of culture, and culture clash with the police so direct. So often they're forgotten. But believe me, I've not forgotten. I've not forgotten that my sister, we used to call fag hag, or the lesbians I knew would go to Christmas parties with the A gays who needed to bring a girl to the party or they were dead at the water cooler and, bullied and lots of horrible things. And they always went, they always looked good. They always made the office envious. I used to remember them with the elan and brio they left the house with, my sister, like they were out to do something and they did it. And they were always doing things like this. And they had a very, very hard time keeping a bar. They were very nice, would let gay guys come into their bar, and it was nice because you had your friend. And I remember one time learning a very important lesson. I went to Cookies, and the bartender said, I really don't want to serve you. And she explained that if she served me, and she liked me, she said she liked me, and I brought more people that she liked, that the bar would tip. And once again, the lesbians would be without a bar. And I said, oh, I understand. The first time I understand such selective discrimination, because I was mature enough, and the movement was mature enough to understand these types of problems, that we could be so dominating and unthoughtless. Gay men could be very thoughtless about the role of women and their needs in liberation. That's all changed now. Thank God, because they came up to the base in Stonewall and did tremendous amount of work during AIDS. So I do want to say something about women. I'm talking about women as well. I don't have concrete examples. I could give a few that I knew, but Stonewall was almost a male fight against a male group of oppressors, the cops. But women, very, very important. Cannot be so without.
Thank you. I loved what you said about sort of queer people and women broadly being wings on the same bird flying towards freedom, because it's true. We're all fighting the same fight against patriarchy and against gender stereotypes and against the expectations for what we can be. And we all need to stand together. The whole LGBTQ community, as well as straight women, to fight against patriarchy.
Oh, absolutely. Mm-hmm. United we stand. Mm-hmm. You're not going to divide our house.
Yes, exactly. Oh, thank you so much for this. I am just absolutely honored to have been able to speak to you about our history. I think in this present moment, as you said, it's so important to be able to pass the torch to willing hands and to be able to learn from people who have been in this fight for so long, both to know that sort of the fight has always been there, and that we've seen darker days than this before, and that we can carry that torch forward into a better future with our whole community together. Thank you so much, Martin, for all of your advocacy, your activism, and all of your work. We're so grateful for that. And I just want to thank the International Day of Pink, who organized your tour in Canada, which is how we here in Scotland were able to get a moment to speak with you. And thank you to the US Embassy for funding that, and to all of the donors today of Pink as well. So the International Day of Pink, just for my Scottish followers, because that isn't quite as big of an event here, we'll be releasing this for ourselves on the International Day against homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia. But the International Day of Pink in Canada and the US and other countries that celebrate it is the International Day for education on LGBTQ issues, LGBTQ history, and for advocacy on LGBTQ rights. And that's something that was started in Canada many years ago and has been growing ever since. So thank you for organizing this and for letting us have some of your time to be able to make this video. Just thank you again, Martin, and hope you enjoy the rest of your tour.
I did, and also I am an admirer of the Scottish Enlightenment.
Oh, yes. I mean, I love living in Scotland. I moved here 10 years ago now, and it obviously you can tell from the accent I'm Canadian, but I've been here for 10 years now, and I've been involved in the sort of Scottish independence movement off and on since 2014. So
I wish Scots the best in their decision to what to do, and it's regrettable to lose your history. As you know, gay people need to refine it, revamp it, and reclaim it. And perhaps I think the Scottish people too have to reclaim their history. It's so buried under British history, which
yes, absolutely,
really English history. So to the Scots, yes, and good luck.